we are seeing a weakening of our social fabric, of our national defenses. Obviously, the economics are really impacting families and thus children. And the culture war, when you're looking at rampant pornography use, the demise of the education system, the way that digital technology has worked its way into every aspect of family life and childhood, the way that we are destroying children's bodies through transgender treatments. Those are the kind of things that ordinary moms and dads go, okay, wait, I may not necessarily understand tax policy, but I know that you are taxing me out of the house right now, and my children need me. So I think that is sort of the advantage of our approach. It very much taps into that, I would say, universal response of, but if you touch the kids, that's when I get involved.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this is our penultimate episode of, I think, season 4 of Moment of Truth. Well over 170 episodes. Absolutely crazy how long we've been doing this, but you guys keep on tuning in, and as long as you do that, we'll keep on making it. And, as long as there's cash in the bank. So go to americanmoment.org/donate in order to help us have that cash in the bank, and become a member on YouTube at American Moments YouTube channel. There you can become a truther or a statesman in order to help support this show. Today we had on a returning guest, but not returning for me because I wasn't on that first episode, and Nick's not on this one. So we both got a bite at the apple of interviewing just an incredible talent in Katy Faust. She has a new book out about pro-child politics that I want to opine on a little bit in the after show about my own thoughts on that issue, because I've written about it before. But she is the founder and president of Them Before Us, a global movement defending children's rights to their mother and father. She publishes and speaks and testifies widely on why marriage and family are matters of justice for children. Her articles have appeared in Newsweek, USA Today, The Federalist, Public Discourse, World Magazine, The Daily Signal, The Washington Examiner, The American Mind, and The American Conservative. She's on the advisory board of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and she helped design the teen edition of CanaVox, which studies sex, marriage, and relationships from natural law perspective. She detailed her philosophy of worldview transmission in her book, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City, and she and her pastor husband are raising their 4 children in Seattle. She is just an extraordinarily talented and forceful voice, I think, for the issues relating to child, family, and marriage. And we had a discussion about the tactics of mentality behind this book that she's written, one that a lot of our friends contributed chapters to, including Dan Caldwell on foreign policy, which tells you that she's really thinking in a very interesting direction about these issues. I won't go much longer. I'll let her speak for herself. We'll go now to Katy Faust. Katy, thank you for coming on the podcast.
That's great to be with you for the first time.
I know. I wasn't here for the episode that you did with Nick, and I very much regretted it because I went back and listened to it, and it was absolutely fantastic. You've written, or rather helped collate a new book, and I think it would be really helpful for our guests to understand why you decided to do it. What's the title? I would butcher it if I tried to do it right now since I don't have a copy on hand. Yep. But tell us that story.
Yeah. So the most recent project of my nonprofit, Them Before Us, is the book Pro-Child Politics, Why Every Cultural, Economic, and National Issue is a Matter of Justice for Children. And we go beyond what we have normally addressed in the Them Before Us movement, which began primarily as a marriage and family cause, centering the child in all conversations about the definition of marriage, divorce, reproductive technologies, adoption, modern families, and really just saying, put kids first. Elevate their rights, their needs, their interests above the desires of adults. When I speak, when I write, I will address most of the cultural issues from the perspective of child protection. And I think the culture war can actually be summarized in terms of protecting children's life, family, mind, and body. All the cultural issues come down to, are you going to protect kids on those 4 critical areas, or are you going to victimize kids? And my executive director, Josh Wood, who wrote the conclusion for Pro-Child Politics, actually said, can't we do this for everything? What if we said we need to put kids first on every issue, not just the cultural issues? Because we learned something at Them Before Us when we put kids first on marriage and family. You get the right personal decisions and you get the right policy decisions. So that's what happened in pro-child politics too. We conscripted 19 subject matter experts to write on everything from energy to the economy to debt to taxes, national security, immigration, education, digital technology, pornography, from the perspective of what if we put kids first?
Well, so I want to zoom out a little bit because, you were someone who came to prominence in politics from sort of outside the DC bubble, right?
Yes.
Is there any very specific experience that you had or something you noticed when you first started coming to this town, advocating for the issues that you did, that there was this very, invisible or in some cases visible fence on what kind of issues you and the broader category of social conservatives are supposed to be talking about, and how you thought about that when you first noticed it?
I'm absolutely an outsider. I do think that helps us move in somewhat unconventional ways and think about issues in ways that aren't necessarily addressed. And it's because I'm not a thought leader. It's because I'm not an intellectual. It's because I didn't go to the Ivy Leagues. I am outside of a lot of the mindset that I actually think really fuels a lot of the good work that's happening in this town. The problem, however, I think specifically with conservatism is it's very hard to connect with the real on the ground mom and dad, the conservative citizens who have no idea what CPI or heritage is, who don't understand the difference between Penn and Princeton. And they're like, whatever, it's so far away. And so what we do, I think the thing that we do at Them Before Us well is I personally read the thought leaders, the Robert Georges, the Yoram Hazonis, the Carl Trumans, the Oz Guinnesses. But then we translate all of that into issues that really connect, into language that connects with the ordinary person. And we make it actionable. And the other thing is that I think that a lot of times in the conservative world, we sort of segment, here's the cultural conservatives, the economic conservatives, here's the national security conservatives. But the reality is that the common man actually is interested in all of them. And I would say that the place where that intersects the most is when you come for the kids. And we are coming for the kids. We are seeing a weakening of our social fabric, of our national defenses. Obviously, the economics are really impacting families and thus children. And the culture war, when you're looking at rampant pornography use, the demise of the education system, the way that digital technology has worked its way into every aspect of family life and childhood, the way that we are destroying children's bodies through transgender treatments. Those are the kind of things that ordinary moms and dads go, okay, wait, I may not necessarily understand tax policy, but I know that you are taxing me out of the house right now, and my children need me. So I think that is sort of the advantage of our approach. It very much taps into that, I would say, universal response of, do what you want, I don't need to understand everything. But if you touch the kids, that's when I get involved.
Yeah. It's interesting because this is an approach that does have analogs in not that long ago American history, which is, I believe even the Family Research Council in the 90s, they used to have a much more expansive vision of what counted as their issues. They were advocating against normalizing trade relations with China, and they were in favor of securing the border, and they actually spent real energy and resources on this. I want to take two issues, not to dive in on the substance of policy reforms, but where, to the uninitiated might seem like a bit of a stretch. Well, how does that connect to pro-child politics? We'll start with immigration. How do you think about that issue, which, it's that of the economy are the number one and number two issues that Americans say that they're dissatisfied with. How is that an issue when it comes to child safety and welfare and their rights as you see them?
Well, I will do my best job of capturing Laura Reese's argument. She's at the Heritage Foundation. She's been doing immigration and border security work for close to 30 years now. But first, let me say the way that I laid this book out, it is going to distill and make those connections very easily on every subject. And I actually had somebody in the publishing world tell me, this project is going to fail. This isn't going to work. How can you have pornography and policing? How can you have race and national security? How can you have ESG and DEI and the environment all in one book by that many different authors? It's going to be a collection of essays. It's not going to be a book. And so I insisted that all the contributors follow the same template, which is number one, begin with the real life story of a child that was harmed. because we believed progressive lies about whatever topic you're writing about. Number 2, tell me how those lies harm kids. Make the direct connection. Number 3, tell me the truth about ESG, immigration, education, pornography. Tell me how we would protect kids if we acted on those truths. And then show me who's done it right. Show me the governor or the municipality that has actually implemented these truths and seen the way that it's protected kids. So what Laura would say, her lies that she outlines is like border security is racist, and this is actually good for America. This is good for American children. This is good for immigrants. But the reality is she makes it very clear that our current immigration policy, the Biden-Harris administration, actually is not just jeopardizing Americans and American children because of the immigration policy. It is victimizing immigrant children. And Laura spends a lot of time talking about the unaccompanied minor lack of process that we now have that really, as we've learned just in the last couple months, has actually siphoned so many of those children off and funneled them into the underground seedy world of child trafficking here in this country. And so unfortunately, our current immigration policy is bad for all children, the ones who live here now and the ones that are on their way.
Yeah. To jump to a slightly different issue, foreign policy is, I think, a very interesting issue. It's one where there's a very live debate on the right, and just by your choice of author for the chapters that you did on that, I think that you make some you put a stake in the ground on where you stand on that. But how have you chosen to apply that framework to that issue, and how might it contrast with how conservatives 20 years ago might have done so?
Well, Dan Caldwell of Defense Priorities wrote our foreign policy, national security chapter. And I really appreciate him. The 2 lies that he mainly identifies is this sort of lie that we have to be the world's policeman, right? That we exist, our foreign policy, our military exists to create liberal democracies throughout the world. And the other lie is that we should be total isolationists. And the truth that he lands on is that actually we need a strong military in fewer places, and we need to advance an American first national security policy. And he makes it very plain that because we have kind of waffled between these 2 extremes, these 2 poles, our country is weaker and our children are more susceptible to foreign dominance, to foreign wars, because we have not really prioritized America's interests first on the world stage. And that just means that we are more vulnerable to the actual threats that are out there. So I really appreciate his framing on that, and that it is not this is not a benign issue when it comes to the rights and well-being of children. We are actually handing our children a much weaker world, national world, because we have failed to engage on foreign policy in a way that protects our country and thus protects children.
It's one of the ways that I think you've been particularly effective, Katy. But you've been engaged in advocacy from day one, not just doing the work of writing books and essays, but really engaging in the public sphere. I was curious: are there elected officials or particular states that have really embraced the mentality when it comes to these issues that your book lays out? And who might those people be?
If you're going to look for a singular politician, I would say Ron DeSantis has done most of it, right? He has taken on education. He has sought to eradicate critical race theory. He has taken on the woke corporations that are advancing a lot of the ESG, DEI narratives, especially directly targeting kids. He has taken a balanced approach, in my opinion, to things like the environment, where he's stewarding the environment well, but it's not the, Chris Barnard of the American Conservation Coalition wrote our chapter on the environment. And that actually is the value of the project, is the people that I tapped to write these different chapters are subject matter experts. They have decades of research experience under their belt. And, he kind of frames out how we have gone away from a genuine conservatism approach to the environment, to a protectionist, like leave it pristine, don't get involved at all. And that's both bad for the environment and bad for kids. So I think Ron DeSantis has done a good job of stewarding the environment in Florida. And so in a lot of the final sections of each chapter where our authors and contributors had to say who is doing this right, his name comes up a couple times because he really is doing what he can to put things in place in a lot of these different areas that are good for his state and thus good for the children of his state.
I want to transition to how you think about tactics, because one criticism I could see levied against your book is that how on earth is a pro-child politics how is that possible as the central governing message of the Republican Party in a country where fewer and fewer people are having children?
Well, the birth dearth, the demographic winter that is coming our way is probably the thing that nobody's talking about that everybody should be talking about. And I will say that it is absolutely connected to the devaluation of children that we have seen. I mean, what is it that all of these topics have in common? It is that in every one of these areas, we are elevating adult desire, adult ideology, adult priorities above the rights and well-being of children. We are saying our own adult self-interest, whether that is our sexual self-interest, whether that is the self-interest of, I don't want to have to deal with the mounting debt, so I'm going to let it accumulate and then put it on the shoulders of my children and grandchildren. It is all an offloading of our immediate responsibility and saying, not only are you going to have to deal with it, kid, you're going to have to deal with it worse because I refused to. And so it is I would say, especially among the progressive left, an elevation of what adults want in the moment, in their immediate pursuit of comfort or security or satisfaction or validation that is trumping the child's fundamental right. And so it is a anti-child mentality. And I think that obviously that trickles over to this idea that why would I have kids at all? They're just a drain, right? They're going to stop me from doing what I really want to do. So you see that sort of on the micro level within the family formation. But I think we're seeing it on a macro level, on the national level as well. In terms of like tactically, why is it that all of these things can and should come together? I would say that tactically, the other side has racked up a lot of wins because they make their message very simple. It is always because there is a victim and a victimizer class. Everything they do, all of their priorities, the social, the economic, the national, it can all be boiled down to their one meta-narrative of equity. We don't have that meta-narrative. You know, when we talk about our different priorities, sometimes it's a religious liberty issue. Sometimes it's a economic fiscal responsibility issue. Sometimes it's a populist sort of message. But I actually think that when you prioritize children, you actually can get that unifying narrative. I think that it is the thing on which, you know, we sit in terms of those three legs of the historically conservative stool. Like, it is the thing. When you prioritize the next generation, you actually get all of it. You get the good policy, but you also get the messaging, the simplicity of the messaging. We are doing this for the kids. We should be the pro-child party. We should be the pro-child movement. And when you do it right, when you say it right, when you prioritize kids, and especially when you humanize them, when you make it very clear that they are victimized when we get these things wrong, you actually do get that unifying narrative, that sort of seamless garment that I would say weaves its way through all of these conservative principles and policies that have such high stakes for the country.
And you believe that that framework of approaching politics can get us from the world we're in right now, where actually the percentage of Americans raising children is not itself a governing majority, and get us to the point where you get the cultural and governing changes so that might be the case again?
Well, you have to change the story of the nation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot going on with the depopulation, the depressed fertility rates. But one of the biggest issues is we are not telling the right story about children and family. We're not telling the right story about men and women. That is why in pro-child politics, we've got a chapter on masculinity written by Ken Harrison, who is the president of Promise Keepers. That's why we have a chapter on femininity written by Peachy Keenan, who goes at the feminism narrative that is so anti-motherhood and anti-child. Like, we have to get the story right about who children are, who humans are, before we're going to be able to answer any of these questions about fertility rates or about getting these other priorities straight too.
Yeah. The issues that are salient in politics change all the time, right? I mean, President Trump, when he first ran for office in 2016, brought a whole set of issues up to the fore. And I think one of the interesting things that's happened in this election cycle specifically is there used to be the world of online politics, and there used to be the world of like CNN and cable news politics. And those are blending together. I mean, you have President Trump going on podcasts like Theo Vaughn and potentially Joe Rogan. Kamala Harris might be going on Joe Rogan. She also went on Call Her Daddy. I mean,
yeah.
And one of the things that was very much gatekept by the mainstream media, and I can, say all sort of conspiratorial things about why, but that was very fruitful online, was what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has called Make America Healthy Again. Mm-hmm. This entire panoply of issues that range from questioning the mainstream consensus on nutrition, on diet, on exercise, and many other issues. How would you apply this framework to that set of issues, and both from a policy perspective and also from a tactical perspective? How does a pro-child movement learn to envelop a new, interesting, rife area like that?
Well, I will say that, honestly, mothers are already there.
Yeah.
I mean, my little and somewhat growing bubble of underground conservative moms in Seattle, they love RFK.
Yeah.
Because they have been freaked out forever, especially about the superabundance of early childhood vaccines.
If there's a capital for this kind of politics, it's probably Seattle.
Oh my
right?
gosh, they love it. And these are conservative moms who are very conservative, but they love this message. Why? Because anybody that is touching grass knows that children are suffering. Like we are, those moms are very concerned, and many of them feel like their children have experienced vaccine injury. You know, they are trying to keep their kids away from the free school lunches, right? The ones that their kids can just go graze on. The kids don't even have to pack a lunch anymore. The school is going to feed them, you know, whatever according to the food pyramid is being offered to them.
12 slices of bread a day.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, that is actually not a case that the ordinary person, that you need to make to the ordinary person. Like, the moms are way, way out in front of that. And so it's very nice that I would say the GOP is sort of catching up with the fact that that actually is something that is so tangible and so immediate and actually so already well researched by ordinary people on the ground. I would say that's a place where ordinary moms are far, far ahead of where the GOP is. And so the nice thing about a put children first, let's protect the kids, what about the child mentality, is you actually will be able to capture and envelop all of the new emerging issues, whatever they are, whether it's some kind of like crazy AI technology or some new bioethics development, which obviously both of them are on the way. If you get children right, if you prioritize their needs, you are also going to get the policy right. It is going to provide the appropriate checks that probably will allow for some level of adult freedom, but also say, we are going to create a hedge of protection around the child. Don't touch the kids.
I want to talk a little bit about the potential pitfalls of this approach, or the ways it might get distorted. The left loves talking about the kids. It's the cudgel that they use to beat over our heads, whether it comes to issues like the environment. I mean, you look at the Sunrise Movement kids, you know, they're throwing stuff at Dianne Feinstein's office. The 16-year-old should be able to vote, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this isn't necessarily universally the case in every country, but in the United States, at least at this moment, young people are very left-wing. There'll be critics that'll say, okay, if you make the central priority of politics the interests of children, then these like communist children will have a disproportionate and distortive effect on American politics. What say you?
Well, this is not a movement saying anything that a child wants, they deserve, and we should give them. I mean, go back to, you know, Them Before Us, our first book, and we are identifying the fundamental natural rights of children, rights they can't protect themselves, interests that they cannot advance on their own. That is the job of adults. And part of the job of adults is to properly identify who children are, what they need, and to what they have a natural right, and then defend those rights. This is not a movement to say, if a child self-identifies, then you need to, you know, pump them full of transgender treatments and hormones and hide their identity from their parents at school. I mean, this is a movement that says children actually have a right to an intact, unmedicalized body. They have a right to a relationship with their parents who have the right to direct their upbringing. A lot of this has to do with properly identifying what natural rights are. And it's not anything that an adult really, really wants or that a child really, really wants. We need to do the work of actually properly identifying who are children, what do they need, and then we have to protect them. I think that the biggest obstacle to that is not necessarily that, you know, the kids are going to rule the roost. It is that that mentality makes demands on adults. If we are going to prioritize children, their life, family, mind, body, their security at a national level, at an international level, at a city level in terms of policing, if we are going to protect their future in terms of their financial future from inflation, from an economics that doesn't prioritize the family, from mounting debt, all of it has something in common, and that is it will infringe on the self-interest of adults. That is the biggest obstacle to this movement. It's not that, you know, we're going to have, you know, like the Chinese say, little emperors who get whatever they want. It is going to be the adults who say, but if I tackle the debt, I might not get reelected.
Yeah.
But, you know, if I say that kids, you know, need their mother and father, that means that I can't have this casual divorce that I want.
Yeah.
This world of putting children first is going to infringe on what adults want. And that's exactly that, I would say, exactly embodies practical justice, right? Justice demands that we give people what they are due, and children are due protection, and it's adults who have to give it to them.
So I completely agree with what you just said. So if we take that that reality about how politics works as a given, I just want to play it out. So asking adults to restrict their own liberties, improperly understood, is hard. And so by the time this mindset percolates up to DC, DC's answer to, pay off a constituency is usually just that, to pay them off. So a new program or a new tax credit or some sort of check that you get. And look, to be clear, no one is more enthusiastic about conservatives reimagining things like child benefits than I am. But there's a ton of resources and energy spent in DC by mostly left-wing groups on, dramatically expanding these forms of welfare. How do you prevent this form of politics from just playing into the kind of expansions of government and, spending that we don't have the money for that the left wants?
Mm-hmm. A pro-child approach will help you with that.
Yeah.
And part of the other tactic that I think we try to do in this book is the left gets what they want. I think the better way to put it is whoever you determine to be the victim, that is going to determine the policy. And so the left does a very, very good job of framing adults who don't get what they want as victims. And so what we need to do on the right is accurately identify children as the victims, and then we need to humanize them. We need to tell their stories. That is why I required that every contributor of pro-child politics begin with the real life story of a child who is harmed because we got energy wrong or the environment wrong or ESG and DEI wrong. Like, we need to do a better job of saying, you cannot just pay this person off. You can't just pass this other bill. You can't just, slough off or agree with this new cultural narrative, because real children will be victimized. So that's step number one. You have to make it clear that somebody is paying for this, and it's the kids. Mm-hmm. The other side has done this so well, and I think that they have succeeded in a very radical social overhaul because they've identified adults who don't get what they want as the victims. Mm. So our first job is to say it is always the children who are the victims, tell their stories, humanize them. And at least then we're going to be able to move the hearts to say, I don't think a payoff is going to work here, because the payoff is still going to victimize the kids.
Yeah.
And I will say, kids are the only demographic that would put up with this because they can't fight back, right? They can't vote. They can't vote the person out of office. They can't kick the shareholder or the CEO out of the company, right? The only demographic that would allow for their future, their identity, their safety, their opportunities, their resources, their family, their very lives to be ignored are kids, because they literally can't fight back.
Yeah. You've spent a ton of time, energy, and your personal credibility on this movement. I think that gives you the authority to be a leader in it. And part of being a leader is sort of disciplining your own flock. So one of the things that, and you can take this any direction you want, that I worry about is sometimes discussions amongst conservatives can be very insular in places like online, and sometimes we fly off the deep end and start imagining that the country is much more with us than it might actually be, going way out on a limb on very unpopular ideas, and in general, just not being very disciplined about our message or our tactics. Name names, opine however you want. Mm-hmm. What is your advice as a leader within this movement? Where are you seeing potential risk factors of where, a pro-child politics could risk getting alienated mm-hmm. from mainstream politics if it's not careful in the years to come?
Yes. There are times where standing for children means you are not going to have a politically popular decision. There's times where you are, especially when you effectively make the case for how kids are being harmed. I think that's why we've seen such positive movement on the transgender issue, because the connection between progressive ideas around your body and your supposed gender identity is so directly connected with very obvious lifelong harm. And our transgender chapter was written by Billboard Chris, who spends his days running around the world with a sandwich board over his, body saying children can't consent to puberty blockers. Yeah. And now we are seeing the very real harm to that. And so in that sense, we have made the case that kids are victimized by this terrible ideology. And now public opinion is with us. But there's other areas where you're not going to necessarily begin with public support, things like IVF, right? You can see the top of the Republican ticket has decided to take a very, not just permissive stance to IVF, but they've endorsed IVF. And I've spent the last 5 years or so educating not just conservatives, but Christians, and not just Christians, but pro-life Christians, on why the big fertility world actually destroys more little lives than Planned Parenthood does. And at first they start with, well, what's the problem with IVF? I mean, isn't this just about adult victims, people who want to have children who can't? And once you make it clear, no. Children are victimized here, right? There's stories all the time about somebody that's, Paris Hilton had 20 boy embryos, but she really wanted the girl. What do you think is going to happen to those 20 boys? Once you start telling people that story and saying, IVF is not about helping infertile couples. IVF is about on-demand designer babies shipped worldwide, very often on the pile of dead baby bodies. People wake up and go, oh my gosh, kids are being harmed here. And so sometimes you are going to begin with a lot of grassroots support, and you're going to be able to tap into really where the energy is. And sometimes you need to educate. But I will tell you, the way to get people on board is to say, it's not like this is a victimless policy. Children will be the victims, and you get to choose. Are you going to defend them, or are you going to ignore them?
What do you think the ripest opportunity, let's say, there's some sort of regime change here in Washington in the next few weeks. What among all of those issues do you think are the ones that there's the most political support for really doing paradigm shifting changes on? It'll be the first major federal opportunity, I think, because you came on the scene with your first book after 2020, right?
Then Before Us was published in 2021.
Yeah. So, there might be a willing audience in every branch of government. What are those ripest opportunities, the lowest hanging fruit that you see immediately on the horizon?
Well, the amazing thing is every major evergreen issue does have some kind of connection to child well-being. And so we don't necessarily need to shift. We don't need to necessarily play politics. We just say whatever it is that is the most pressing for the American people, for the next administration, we can frame that through the lens of child protection. So again, a lot of times, you're not necessarily going to have to change your policy. Literally, this is just a messaging strategy for those that are deeply committed to conservatism. If you want to address problems with immigration, which I think is definitely at, top of the mind for a lot of us, you address that in the sense of protecting America's children and protecting immigrant children. And that's not a hard case to make because the numbers are there and the stories are there. I think in matters of economics, you can very clearly make the case that what we're doing right now in terms of inflation, in terms of debt, in terms of taxation, in terms of the way that we are not necessarily creating an economy that favors mothers and fathers staying home with their kid, at least mothers staying home with their children when they want to, is bad for kids. And so instead of approaching this as unfortunately we so often do in the conservative movement, which is reason. And I'm all for reason. Yeah. I love the stats. I love the research, but honestly, it just doesn't connect. Yeah. So this is a tactic.
Charts do not inspire the soul.
Charts do not inspire. Charts are helpful as a follow-up.
Yeah.
After you
or as assassination, defense.
There you go. Should you need to turn your head at the right moment, the chart is there for you. So whatever it is that is next on the administration's docket. And there's some issues, I would say matters of marriage and family, not going to be very important to them. Unfortunately, it's still extremely important to children. So I will continue to bang the drum about that until the world catches up with me, right? We don't change our tune. We don't try to tell a lie and ignore the rights of children just because it's politically inconvenient. The world needs to catch up with us. The world needs to get on the side of children related to marriage and family, even if it's not going to be a priority for the next administration. But other areas, economics, immigration, national security, energy, the way that we deal with the environment, absolutely, we need to frame that as matters of justice for children because they are.
What's next for Them Before Us, and where can people follow all of your work?
There is so much that is next. We are hell-bent on a global takeover. And we are on our way, which is fantastic. You can go to thembeforeus.com. Please subscribe. We have so many different projects coming up. We have more initiatives, more books. We aim to take back some of the lost legal ground on the marriage issue. And as far as I know, I don't know any other organization that's even working towards that right now. But we do need champions. What the left has done so well is they've created a victim class. We saw it very, very clearly in the LGBT movement. And they said, you may not be one of those victims, but you can be their ally. Well, we have victims. They are children. And we need everybody, every adult who is willing to put them before us to say, I will be their ally. They are the ones that I'm going to protect. So come to thembeforeus.com. You can follow us on all the socials, but we really do need everybody in on this fight.
Thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
If you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow Upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I certainly did. We were taping here pretty early in the morning, and I'll say Katy woke me up better than coffee ever could. She's got a ton of energy. I actually wrote an article about this topic essentially a few years ago for the American Spectator. I forget the exact title I had for it, but it was something like social conservatives have something to say about every issue. And my basic argument was this. The most risible people, the most sinister people in Washington, D.C. want to engage in this process by which social conservatives are ghettoized to a small universe of issues, namely issues of, sex, abortion and marriage and transgender policy, maybe a touch of education. And then economics people get to do all economic policy, and foreign policy practitioners get to do all foreign policy. And that, I think, is ultimately an insufficient approach to politics, and it sets social conservatives up for ghettoization and ignominy. And the reason why is a couple ways. One, I think we're entering a very tricky season for social conservatives. A lot of their flagship issues, whether it's marriage, same-sex marriage, whether it's things like abortion or IVF, are going to be in a little bit of a political winter. That's one place that Katy and I might disagree. And I think it would be a real risk that the Republican Party, or a real risk for the social conservative movement, if it chose to quintuple down on those issues as opposed to more greener pastures. And frankly, I believe the result of that would be social conservatives getting marginalized from the Republican Party. And they certainly don't have any home in the Democratic Party. And so that would just be them getting marginalized, period. What I do think there's a lot of opportunity for is social conservatives redirecting their energies not only towards issues that have a much more burgeoning consensus around them, but issues that will give them more power and sway in American politics. There's two examples that really come to mind. One is a relatively conventional example, one that a lot of social conservative think tanks and organizations have been working on, which is the technological influence on children and family, namely things like pornography, social media usage, and big tech in general. We have friends at think tanks like the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Katy has a whole chapter on pornography in this book. Our friends at the American Principles Project, Terry's on our board. They've all chosen to advocate very aggressively on age verification for pornography, and they've been wildly successful across the 50 states in helping get that legislation passed, including in purple and even blue states. So that's one example of a place where, social conservatives can increase the mind share and influence they have in politics by being active. And then another somewhat related issue is what RFK Jr. is calling Make America Healthy Again. There is a growing sense, especially in, unusual for Republicans areas like Katy's hometown, downtown Seattle, where there is a growing sense that the American people are being poisoned, that American children are being poisoned, whether it's the cafeteria, school lunches, the water supply, the vaccine schedule, the mainstream healthcare consensus on a whole variety of issues. It's, maybe 18 months out from being CDC guidelines that every obese 12-year-old in America should be on Ozempic. In fact, I think in some cases they've already said that. And the real question is, why do we have obese 12-year-olds? Not why should we be spending trillions of dollars medicating every single one of them? And so taking that issue and bringing it into the social conservative camp as a core zeitgeist issue of consideration, I think is the single best thing that social conservatives can do in order to increase their own power and influence over the coming years, because it is through engaging with that issue that the core values underlying social conservatism, I think, could see a resurgence in the public sphere, a recognition that we are not just, meat sacks, that we are embodied mind and soul, and that, that we are doing all sorts of terrible things to our bodies, and that can apply to all sorts of things. In fact, I remember once having a conversation with a pretty wealthy couple in Austin, and they ended up coming to the right through some of these esoteric health issues, but they weren't traditional social conservatives on, say, abortion, birth control, and other things, until they realized that all of those things are actually deeply, deeply, deeply traumatic and injurious to the human body, and they now are simpatico on all those issues. And so I think that there's a lot to think about this approach. Katy and I might not agree on the tactical posture that politicians might have to appropriately take in order to navigate what are very treacherous waters right now. But I think she's a fantastic voice for this. And the thing I can triple underline and co-sign is the idea that social conservatives, pro-child politics, has a lot to say about not just the conventional issues of social conservatism, but really every single issue. So just some food for thought opining, since Nick isn't here to restrain me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode. Please become a member on YouTube. You can become either a truther or a statesman. Check out the backlog of this show at AmericanMoment.org. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. Be sure to rate and review us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Be sure to donate $10,000 at AmericanMoment.org/donate. Give us some of that crypto. I hear it's rallying. And in general, support us in any way you can. We really need it. This is an extraordinarily exciting season. Reach out to us if you'd like to get involved. We will see you next week for the final episode of Moment of Truth. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.